It was an ordinary morning at one of the busiest branches of a well-known bank. The sun had just begun to shine through the large glass windows, casting soft light on the polished floors. Customers were quietly waiting in line, and the staff moved around handling their tasks with practiced efficiency. On the surface, everything seemed calm, orderly, and professional. But behind this calm exterior, a story was about to unfold, one that would leave a lasting impression on everyone involved. A woman stepped into the bank, blending seamlessly with the other customers. She wore simple clothes, nothing flashy, just an ordinary outfit that made her look like someone who belonged in the crowd. Her hair was pulled back in a casual style, and she carried a small bag slung across her shoulder. She didn't draw attention to herself, and that was exactly the point. She wasn't there as a customer or for business. She had a purpose that most people could never imagine. Unknown to anyone inside the bank, this woman was not just a customer. She was the owner of the bank. She was the CEO, a powerful, intelligent, and highly respected figure in the financial world. Yet today, she had chosen to step out of her office and go undercover. She wanted to see firsthand how her employees treated people who walked into the bank, people who depended on them every day for financial support, advice, and service. Walking slowly through the entrance, she felt the soft hum of air conditioning and the faint scent of coffee that always seemed to linger in busy banks. She observed the staff carefully. The tellers were smiling politely at some customers, while a few appeared distracted, tapping away at keyboards or glancing at their phones. She noticed small things: a teller who sighed impatiently when a customer asked a question, a security guard who barely looked up from his desk, and a receptionist who greeted people with a half-hearted smile. These details, she knew, were important. They told her more about her employees than any report ever could. She approached the first counter with a calm demeanor, keeping her movements unassuming. The teller glanced at her, barely registering her presence, and then quickly returned to processing the documents of the previous customer. She smiled politely, hoping to catch the teller's attention, but it was clear that he was in a rush, eager to finish his work as quickly as possible. She didn't feel offended. Instead, she made a mental note. She wanted to see how her staff would handle real situations without knowing that their boss was right in front of them. As she moved further into the branch, she noticed another staff member helping an elderly man who seemed confused about some forms. This staff member spoke quickly, clearly frustrated, and seemed impatient. The elderly man kept asking questions, and the teller's irritation grew more visible with each response. The CEO watched quietly, taking it all in. She knew that running a bank was stressful, and employees were often under pressure, but seeing such impatience and lack of empathy concerned her. She decided to test the staff further. She approached a different counter and asked questions that were intentionally tricky or slightly unusual, the kind of questions a normal customer might hesitate to ask. She watched as the teller's face tightened and he responded with short, clipped answers. The way he avoided eye contact, shuffled papers nervously, and seemed annoyed at her presence spoke volumes. It was not just about efficiency. It was about respect, care, and the way people made others feel, and that was the part she was most focused on. While observing, she also noticed subtle acts of kindness from some employees. One young woman quietly guided a mother with a small child through the forms, speaking gently and reassuringly. A security guard smiled at an anxious-looking customer and helped them find the right counter. These small acts reminded the CEO that not everyone was the same, and that good behavior could make a huge difference in someone's day. She made a mental note of these employees as well, knowing that they represented the values she wanted in her company. As the morning moved on, she found herself standing near the middle of the branch, watching a middle-aged man behind the counter. Something about him seemed off. He appeared confident, perhaps too confident, and had an attitude that suggested he didn't like being questioned. When she approached with a simple request for help understanding some account details, his reaction surprised her. He didn't just ignore her question at first. He seemed irritated, almost offended that she had asked. She repeated her question politely, hoping for a professional response. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, crossed his arms, and gave her a look that made it clear he thought she was wasting his time. She could feel the tension building, but she remained calm. Her goal was not to provoke anyone. It was to observe and understand. Yet she also knew that this moment was telling. This was the kind of behavior that could damage the reputation of her bank if it went unchecked. She took a deep breath, keeping her tone steady and polite, and tried again to explain her request clearly. The staff member, however, seemed to grow more impatient and less willing to listen. Other customers began to notice the interaction, sensing the growing tension. Some gave subtle glances while others looked away, uncomfortable with what was happening. The CEO noticed the reactions, realizing that even small conflicts could affect the atmosphere in a bank. She also realized that her staff's behavior was being witnessed not only by her but by other people who could form lasting impressions about the institution. She then decided to test him one final time. She asked a question that should have been simple for a trained professional to answer, something that would reveal whether he was capable of handling customers with patience and care. His response was immediate and harsh. He raised his voice slightly, clearly annoyed, and accused her of causing unnecessary trouble. The CEO maintained her composure, speaking softly but firmly, making sure she remained respectful even in the face of rudeness. At that moment, the staff member made a serious mistake. Perhaps believing she was just another difficult customer, he reached out abruptly and slapped her on the arm, a gesture of frustration and poor judgment. The CEO froze for a moment, stunned by the action. She had encountered challenges and disrespect before, but nothing like this in a professional setting, especially not in her own bank. Before she could respond, the security guard stepped in, grabbing her arm and trying to detain her. She allowed herself to be restrained for a moment, observing everything around her, the shocked faces of customers, the nervous glances of other staff, and the growing realization that something had gone wrong. She didn't panic. Instead, she focused on remaining calm, keeping her mind clear as she assessed the situation. She knew that revealing her identity too early could cause chaos, but she also understood that this incident would need to be addressed immediately. The staff's behavior had crossed a line, and it was a test of character as much as it was a test of professionalism. She decided to wait, letting the situation unfold naturally while gathering all the details she needed to make informed decisions later. Even in detention, she remained composed. She noticed the fear and guilt creeping into the faces of some employees, while others looked defensive, unwilling to admit they had acted inappropriately. Her mind raced with thoughts about accountability, responsibility, and the importance of maintaining standards in her organization. She knew that what she saw today would not only shape her decisions, but also set an example for the entire company. By the end of the morning, she had seen enough to understand the strengths and weaknesses of her team. She had observed kindness and compassion, impatience and arrogance, confidence and carelessness. But most importantly, she had witnessed an incident that highlighted the urgent need for change. The slap, the detention, and the reactions of everyone involved provided her with the insight she needed to take decisive action. As she left the branch that morning, still in her undercover persona, she reflected on what she had seen. She was not angry. Rather, she was determined. She understood that leadership was not just about making money or expanding a company. It was about creating a culture of respect, empathy, and professionalism. Every decision she made from this moment forward would be informed by the events of this morning, ensuring that her bank became a place where every customer was treated with dignity and every employee understood the weight of their actions. The CEO walked out of the bank, blending into the crowd once again. To the outside world, she was just another person walking down the street, but in her mind, she was preparing for the changes that would soon take place. She knew the next steps would be critical, not just for the staff member who had acted out, but for the entire organization. This was only the beginning, and she was ready to ensure that justice, accountability, and professionalism would prevail. And so the story of that ordinary morning, filled with tension, observation, and unexpected confrontation, became the first chapter in a larger journey, a journey that would test the boundaries of respect, challenge assumptions, and ultimately demonstrate the power of leadership and courage in the face of wrongdoing. The tension in the bank was thick, almost tangible. After the slap, the undercover CEO stood frozen for a moment, letting the shock sink in. Customers nearby gasped quietly, some murmuring to each other while a few quickly moved to other counters, uncomfortable with the scene unfolding in front of them. The staff member, clearly frustrated, seemed unaware of the gravity of what he had just done. He leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, a smug expression on his face as if daring anyone to challenge him. The security guard who had initially intervened now took a firmer stance. "Ma'am, please come with me," he said, gently but insistently grabbing her arm. She didn't resist. She understood that in the eyes of the staff she was just another difficult customer. What mattered now was to see how they would handle the situation, how far their professionalism or lack of it would stretch. As they moved toward a small office near the back, she noticed several employees watching from behind their counters. Their expressions ranged from curiosity to fear. Some seemed confused, unsure of whether to intervene or stay silent. One teller whispered something to her colleague, shaking her head. It was clear that no one expected a simple visit to turn into such a confrontation. Inside the office, the staff member who had slapped her now became defensive. "Why are you making such a big deal out of this?" he asked, his tone sharp. "She's just a customer asking questions. I was just trying to do my job." His voice carried frustration, but there was also a hint of fear creeping in. He had acted impulsively, and now the situation was spiraling beyond his control. The CEO remained calm. She kept her tone measured, soft yet firm. "You do not get to slap anyone anywhere under any circumstances. That is not how professionals behave. That is not how people should treat others, especially in a place of business." She looked at him directly, her gaze steady, not showing anger, only disappointment. It was clear she expected accountability. The security guard shifted uncomfortably, unsure of what to do next. He had done his duty by stepping in, but he could sense the intensity of the situation. Everyone in the room seemed to realize that this was no ordinary complaint. The air felt heavier, the tension more pressing. Even the walls of the office, plain and corporate, seemed to close in as the reality of the incident settled on everyone present. Meanwhile, outside the office, customers whispered quietly, some peeking through the glass to see what was happening. A few staff members tried to maintain a sense of normalcy at their counters, but the atmosphere had changed. What had been a regular day of banking was now something extraordinary, a moment that would be remembered and talked about for a long time. Back in the office, the staff member tried to justify his actions. "She was being difficult," he said, avoiding eye contact. "She asked too many questions, and I was just trying to maintain order." His voice wavered slightly, betraying the fact that he knew he had crossed a line. It was a mix of arrogance and regret, an emotional cocktail that often comes with being caught in the wrong. The CEO listened carefully, analyzing his words, his body language, and his attitude. She noted the defensiveness, the lack of empathy, and the subtle excuses. All of this told her more about his character than any performance review ever could. At the same time, she recognized that anger, impatience, and poor judgment could happen to anyone under stress. But this was not just about stress, it was about crossing boundaries, about failing to respect another human being. She continued, her voice calm but unwavering. "Being a professional means controlling your emotions, even when situations are challenging. It means treating people with respect, no matter how frustrated you might feel. You failed in that today, and in my bank such behavior cannot be tolerated." Her words had weight. They were not just a reprimand, they were a lesson, a standard she expected everyone to follow. The staff member's face flushed, and he shifted in his chair. He realized now that this was not going to be swept under the rug. There would be consequences. For the first time, the full weight of his actions hit him. He had acted violently, and now the person he had disrespected was not only calm but fully aware of her authority. He tried to speak again, but the words faltered on his tongue. Meanwhile, the CEO's mind was already working, considering what steps to take next. This wasn't just about punishment. It was about making sure the entire team understood the importance of professionalism. She would need to hold a formal hearing, review procedures, and perhaps even implement new training to prevent incidents like this from happening again. Leadership, she knew, was not about being popular. It was about setting standards and ensuring they were upheld. Outside the office, whispers grew louder. Some employees were debating what had happened. Others were silently reflecting on how they might have reacted differently. A young teller, who had earlier helped an elderly customer with patience and kindness, shook her head slightly, thinking about how easy it could be to let frustration take over. The CEO's quiet observation had sent ripples through the branch, making everyone more aware of their actions. The security guard, now standing slightly to the side, observed the exchange with a mix of relief and concern. He had followed protocol, but he could feel that the situation was far from over. He had a responsibility to maintain order. But he also understood that this incident could have long-term consequences for the staff involved and for the branch as a whole. As the confrontation continued, the CEO noticed subtle signs in the staff member's behavior. His hands shook slightly, his breathing was uneven, and his eyes darted nervously. These small details revealed more than words ever could: guilt, fear, and a dawning realization that he had made a serious mistake. The CEO did not exploit these signs to humiliate him. Instead, she used them as part of her careful assessment of his character and potential for change. After several minutes, she decided it was time to shift the focus. "This isn't just about you," she said, speaking slowly and deliberately. "It's about the culture of this bank. It's about how every employee, from the teller to the security guard, treats every customer. Your behavior today was unacceptable, but more importantly, it is a lesson for everyone here. Respect is not optional. Professionalism is not optional. These are not suggestions, they are expectations." Her words resonated through the room. Even the defensive staff member felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on him. He had been given an opportunity to understand the impact of his actions, and now it was clear that there would be consequences if he failed to learn from this moment. The CEO then made a decision. She would allow the branch manager to join the conversation to provide additional support and context. The manager entered the office, looking anxious but professional. She listened as the CEO calmly recounted the incident, explaining what had occurred and emphasizing the importance of accountability. The branch manager nodded, understanding that swift action was necessary to prevent further issues and to restore confidence among staff and customers alike. While the formal discussion continued, the customers outside waited quietly. Some were still curious, while others were reflecting on what they had witnessed. The incident had become more than a conflict between an employee and a customer. It was now a lesson in leadership, respect, and accountability. The CEO's calm, measured approach set an example that everyone could see, even from a distance. Back in the office, the staff member finally spoke, his voice quieter now, tinged with regret. I didn't realize it would go this far," he admitted. "I shouldn't have acted that way." His words were simple but significant. Acknowledging the mistake was the first step toward understanding the importance of professional conduct and the consequences of failing to uphold it. The CEO nodded, her expression neutral but firm. "Acknowledging the mistake is the first step," she said. "But it is not enough. You must understand the impact of your actions and take responsibility. There will be a review, and there will be consequences. But this is also an opportunity to learn, to grow, and to become a better professional. How you respond from this moment forward will determine your future here." The branch manager agreed, emphasizing that the incident could not be ignored. She explained that the bank had strict policies regarding workplace behavior, and that any form of physical aggression or disrespect toward customers would be treated seriously. This was a moment of clarity for everyone involved, a reminder that actions had consequences, and that leadership required courage, fairness, and integrity. By the end of the conversation, the staff member sat quietly, reflecting on what had happened. He realized that he had underestimated the situation, overestimated his control, and failed to recognize the humanity of the person in front of him. The CEO, still in her undercover guise, observed him carefully, noting the subtle changes in his demeanor. There was a sense of realization, a moment where understanding began to replace defensiveness, and that was a critical turning point. As the office returned to a semblance of normalcy, the CEO stepped out, still maintaining her undercover appearance. She walked past the counters where staff members exchanged glances, some thoughtful, some anxious. The incident had left a mark, not just on the staff member who acted out, but on everyone who witnessed the confrontation. They had seen firsthand how quickly professionalism could be tested, and how essential respect and patience were in their daily roles. Walking out of the branch and into the sunlight, she felt a sense of purpose. The confrontation had been intense, even shocking, but it had also been necessary. She now had a clear understanding of who in her organization needed guidance, who could handle pressure, and who required correction. More importantly, she had seen how a single moment of poor judgment could ripple through an entire team, affecting morale, customer trust, and the culture of the workplace. She knew that the next steps would be decisive. The staff member's behavior could not be ignored. Accountability was essential, not just for him but for the entire team, and she was ready to take the actions necessary to ensure that her bank remained a place of respect. Professionalism and integrity, the story of that morning, the slap, the detention, the confrontation, and the realization was far from over. It had set the stage for change, for reflection, and for a deeper understanding of what it truly meant to lead. And the CEO, calm and determined, was prepared to guide her team through the next steps, ensuring that lessons were learned and standards were upheld. The tension in the bank had not yet fully faded when the CEO, still in her undercover appearance, decided it was time to reveal the truth. She had watched, listened, and observed long enough to understand the behaviors, attitudes, and weaknesses within her staff. Now it was time for the most crucial moment, letting everyone know who she really was. She took a deep breath, straightening her posture and lifting her chin slightly. Her calm and composed demeanor contrasted sharply with the nervous energy in the room. Staff members who had moments ago felt in control of the situation now glanced at her uncertainly. Even the security guard seemed tense, sensing that something important was about to unfold. "I have something to tell all of you," she began, her voice steady and clear. "I am not just a customer here. I am the CEO and owner of this bank." For a moment, there was silence so heavy it seemed to press against the walls. Eyes widened, jaws dropped, and mouths opened, but no words came out. The staff who had been defensive moments earlier suddenly felt small, realizing they had acted inappropriately in front of the very person who held the highest authority in the company. The staff member who had slapped her froze completely. His face went pale and his hands trembled slightly. The arrogance and defiance that had carried him through the confrontation moments ago evaporated instantly. He realized now the gravity of his actions, and the full weight of his mistake hit him like a wave. Other employees whispered quietly among themselves, some covering their mouths in disbelief. "She owns the bank," one murmured to a colleague. Another shook their head, unable to comprehend how they had misjudged a person so completely. The atmosphere shifted instantly, moving from tension and defensiveness to shock, awe, and a dawning awareness of reality. The CEO allowed a moment for everyone to process the revelation. She didn't raise her voice or make threats. She simply stood there, calm, powerful, and confident, letting the truth sink in. She could see the mixture of guilt, fear, and embarrassment etched into the faces of her staff. It was clear that they understood they had crossed a line, not just professionally but morally. Then she spoke again, her tone still calm but firm. "What happened here today was unacceptable. You attacked someone physically. You treated a person with disrespect. You failed to uphold the basic standards that I expect in this bank. And the worst part is, you did it without knowing who you were dealing with." Her eyes swept across the room, holding each person's gaze long enough to make her words resonate. The staff member who had slapped her now stammered, trying to explain himself. I didn't know. I thought she was just..." His voice trailed off as he realized there was no excuse. There was no justification for what he had done. He had acted impulsively, arrogantly, and violently, and now he could see the consequences looming over him. The CEO continued, her voice softening slightly, though her message remained clear. "I understand that mistakes happen. People get frustrated. But there are limits. There are boundaries. Respect is not optional. Professionalism is not optional. You cannot treat people like this no matter what you think about them. You cannot assume, judge, or act violently. Today you failed." Her words were not meant to humiliate but to teach. She wanted the staff to understand the importance of accountability, empathy, and awareness. She wanted them to reflect on their actions and learn from this moment, to ensure it would never happen again. Leadership, she knew, was not just about enforcing rules. It was about inspiring understanding and change. As she spoke, she noticed a few employees quietly nodding, their expressions thoughtful. They realized that the incident had revealed more than just one person's misconduct. It had exposed weaknesses in training, gaps in awareness, and areas where the bank's culture needed reinforcement. The CEO had not only confronted one individual, but had also highlighted the responsibility of everyone in the branch. She turned her gaze back to the staff member who had slapped her. "You need to understand the full consequences of your actions," she said. "There will be a formal review, and there will be disciplinary action. This is not negotiable, but it is also an opportunity. An opportunity to learn, grow, and improve. How you respond from here will determine what kind of professional you become. The staff member swallowed hard, his eyes shifting nervously. He realized that this was not the end of the story, but a pivotal moment in his career. He had been given a chance to reflect, to understand, and to change, but only if he chose to do so. The gravity of the situation weighed heavily on him, and for the first time, he felt the full impact of his impulsive behavior. Meanwhile, the security guard, who had been tense throughout the confrontation, now relaxed slightly. He understood that the immediate danger had passed, but he also recognized the lessons being imparted. The CEO had demonstrated poise, authority, and moral clarity in a situation that could have easily escalated further. Her calm, measured approach set an example for everyone present, showing that true leadership required composure, wisdom, and courage. Other employees began to whisper among themselves, some reflecting on how they might have acted in similar situations. A young teller, who had always prided herself on being helpful and kind, felt reassured that her approach to customers aligned with the standards expected by the leadership. Another employee, who had sometimes been impatient, realized that small acts of frustration could have large consequences, and that awareness and control were crucial. The CEO then shifted the conversation to the broader lesson. "This incident is not just about one person," she said. "It is about all of us. Every interaction we have with a customer reflects the values of this bank. Every smile, every word, every action matters, and when we fail to meet these standards, we not only hurt our customers, but we also hurt ourselves and our team." Her words resonated throughout the branch. Even those who had not been directly involved in the confrontation understood that the incident had consequences for everyone. It was a reminder that professionalism, respect, and empathy were not just guidelines. They were essential to the culture and reputation of the bank. Then, she allowed a moment for the staff to ask questions. Some hesitated, unsure if it was appropriate to speak. Others gathered courage, seeking clarification about expectations, policies, and the upcoming review process. The CEO answered each question patiently, explaining that the goal was not only to address the misconduct but also to ensure that everyone understood their responsibilities and the standards they were expected to uphold. She emphasized that leadership was not about fear or intimidation. "I am not here to punish for the sake of punishment," she said. "I am here to guide, to teach, and to set clear standards. You all have the potential to do great work, to serve our customers well, and to create a culture of respect and excellence. But that potential can only be realized if you act responsibly, thoughtfully, and with integrity." The staff member who had slapped her looked down, reflecting on her words. He realized that his behavior had not only put him in jeopardy, but had also damaged trust with his colleagues and customers. The CEO's calm yet firm approach made him understand that true accountability required acknowledgement, reflection, and a commitment to change. Meanwhile, the employees outside the office watched as the conversation unfolded. They could see the seriousness of the situation, the authority of the CEO, and the clarity of her message. Some felt relief that the confrontation was being handled thoughtfully, while others felt a renewed sense of responsibility, understanding that their daily actions mattered more than they had realized. The CEO concluded the session by reiterating the importance of professionalism. "This is a turning point," she said, "not just for the individual involved, but for all of you. Let this incident serve as a reminder of the standards we uphold, the respect we owe each other, and the expectations we have for every employee in this bank. Learn from it, grow from it, and ensure that it never happens again." Her words left a lasting impression. The staff member who had acted out remained silent, absorbing the full impact of the conversation. Others exchanged glances, some nodding quietly, others thinking deeply about their own behaviors. The atmosphere in the branch, though tense, had shifted toward reflection and understanding. Finally, the CEO stepped away, her presence still commanding even in her undercover guise. She had delivered her message, set clear expectations, and begun the process of accountability. The incident, while difficult, had provided valuable insight into the culture of the branch, the character of the staff, and the areas where leadership and guidance were needed most. As she left the office and returned to her observation of the branch, she felt a sense of clarity. The revelation of her identity had not only shocked the staff, but it also created an opportunity for growth, learning, and improvement. The bank would be stronger because of it, and the employees would be better equipped to handle challenges in the future. The morning's events, from the slap to the revelation, had changed everything. What began as a simple undercover visit had turned into a powerful lesson in leadership, accountability, and respect. The CEO knew that the days ahead would involve difficult decisions, training, and careful management, but she was ready. She understood that true leadership required courage, clarity, and a willingness to confront uncomfortable truths head-on. And so, the story of that morning, filled with tension, revelation, and a powerful lesson, entered a new chapter. A chapter that would test the limits of accountability, reshape the culture of the branch, and demonstrate the transformative power of leadership when it is exercised with wisdom, empathy, and authority. After the revelation, the branch slowly began to settle, but the atmosphere remained heavy with tension. Staff members whispered quietly to each other, still processing the fact that the person they had confronted, and even assaulted, was their CEO. Eyes darted nervously across the room, and the staff member who had slapped her sat quietly, head bowed, hands clasped tightly together. He had never felt so small in his life. The reality of his actions weighed heavily on him, and he knew that things would never be the same. The CEO, though still calm and composed, was thinking carefully about the next steps. Revealing her identity had been necessary, but she knew that simply confronting the staff member was not enough. There needed to be a process, one that would hold him accountable, reinforce the standards of the bank, and ensure that all employees learned from this incident. She wanted to approach it in a way that was firm, fair, and focused on growth. She called the branch manager aside for a private conversation. "We need to handle this carefully," she said. "The employee acted violently, and there must be consequences. But this is also a chance to teach the team what professionalism truly means. I want a formal review, a clear record of the incident, and a plan for how we address this with the entire staff." The branch manager nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. "I will prepare everything immediately," she said. "I want to make sure we approach this correctly. The rest of the team is shaken, and we need to address their concerns as well." Meanwhile, the staff member who had slapped the CEO remained silent. He felt a deep sense of shame. For years he had thought he knew how to behave professionally, but in one impulsive moment he had shown how little he had actually understood. The CEO's calm and measured response had left him stunned, unable to formulate excuses. The realization that he had violated both rules and trust filled him with a mix of fear, guilt, and regret. Other employees began to reflect on what had happened as well. Some who had witnessed the slap realized that it could have happened to anyone, at any time, and that such behavior was unacceptable in a professional environment. Others thought about the subtle ways they themselves had allowed impatience or frustration to influence their interactions with customers. The incident had created a ripple effect, making everyone more aware of their behavior and the standards they needed to uphold. The CEO decided to address the entire branch. She gathered the staff in the main area, her presence commanding attention. "I know this morning was difficult for everyone," she began, her tone calm but serious. "What happened here was not acceptable. Violence, disrespect, and poor judgment cannot be tolerated under any circumstances. But this is also an opportunity, a moment to reflect, learn, and grow as professionals. We are all responsible for the culture of this bank. Every action we take matters." Her words struck a chord. Staff members listened attentively, realizing that the incident was not just about one individual, but about the entire team. The CEO continued, emphasizing the importance of respect, empathy, and professionalism. "We are in the business of helping people, guiding them, and providing support," she said. "When we fail to treat people with dignity, we fail not only our customers but also ourselves and our colleagues. Today has reminded us of that lesson in the most direct way possible." The staff member who had slapped her now lowered his gaze completely. He felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on him, knowing that there would be formal consequences. Yet he also understood that this was a chance to reflect and improve. The CEO had not yelled or humiliated him. Instead, she had shown the strength of calm authority, making it clear that accountability did not have to be cruel, but it had to be real. The CEO then outlined the next steps. "There will be a formal review of the incident. We will discuss what happened, why it happened, and what measures need to be taken. Disciplinary action will follow, but so will guidance, training, and support to ensure that everyone understands and internalizes the lessons of this day. Our goal is not just punishment, but growth, for everyone. She emphasized that leadership was about creating a culture where people could learn from mistakes without fear, but also where serious violations of professionalism could never be ignored. We lead by example, she said. We treat people with respect. We uphold the values of this bank in every interaction, and we take responsibility when we fail. The conversation sparked a lot of reflection among the employees. A young teller who had been quiet throughout the morning realized how easy it was to let small frustrations affect interactions with customers. Another employee thought about the times they had been impatient or dismissive and resolved to be more mindful in the future. The incident had become more than a conflict. It had become a powerful lesson in empathy, awareness, and professionalism. In the office, the staff member who had slapped the CEO was called in for a private discussion. The CEO spoke directly to him, her tone firm but fair. "You acted impulsively and violently," she said. "That behavior is not acceptable. You must take full responsibility for your actions, but this is also an opportunity to reflect, learn, and demonstrate that you can be a better professional. How you respond from this moment will define your future here." The employee nodded, swallowing hard. He understood that there was no escaping accountability, but he also sensed that this was not the end. It was a chance to make amends, to rebuild trust, and to grow as a professional. The CEO's words, calm and authoritative, had conveyed both the seriousness of the situation and the possibility for redemption. Meanwhile, the branch manager worked to support the rest of the team. She spoke to employees individually, answering questions, addressing concerns, and helping them process what had happened. She emphasized that while mistakes could happen, the way people responded to those mistakes was crucial. Everyone needed to understand the standards of the bank and commit to upholding them consistently. Outside the immediate confrontation, the atmosphere in the branch slowly began to shift. Staff members moved with more care, spoke with more thoughtfulness, and observed their own behavior in ways they hadn't before. The morning's events had left a mark, not just on the individuals directly involved, but on the entire team. Awareness, reflection, and accountability were now at the forefront of everyone's mind. The CEO took a moment to reflect herself. She had come undercover to observe, to understand, and to identify areas for improvement. What she had found was both disappointing and enlightening. The incident had revealed weaknesses in judgment, gaps in awareness, and areas where additional training was needed. But it had also revealed moments of kindness, professionalism, and thoughtfulness among other employees. Both sides of the spectrum would inform how she approached leadership and culture building in the future. She also recognized the importance of clear communication. The way the incident was addressed, the calm authority, the fair but firm accountability, the emphasis on growth, would serve as a model for handling future challenges. Employees needed to see that mistakes were not ignored, that violence and disrespect were unacceptable, and that leadership would always act to uphold standards. The staff member who had slapped her was given specific instructions for the formal review process. He was required to provide a full account of the incident, reflect on his behavior, and demonstrate understanding of the consequences of his actions. The CEO emphasized that this was not just about punishment, but about demonstrating accountability and commitment to improvement. At the same time, other employees were encouraged to reflect on their own behavior and consider how they could contribute to a more professional, respectful, and empathetic environment. The CEO understood that culture change could not happen overnight, but moments like this could be catalysts for lasting improvement. By the end of the day, the branch had returned to a semblance of normalcy, though the memory of the morning's events lingered. Employees moved with greater awareness, communicated more thoughtfully, and carried a renewed sense of responsibility. The CEO, still in her undercover guise, observed quietly, noting the subtle shifts in behavior and the beginning of a cultural transformation. As she prepared to leave the branch, she reflected on the lessons learned. Leadership was not about authority alone. It was about empathy, accountability, and the courage to confront difficult situations directly. The incident had been challenging, but it had provided invaluable insight into the character of her staff, the culture of the branch, and the areas where improvement was needed. She walked out into the afternoon sunlight, calm, determined and confident. The confrontation, the revelation, and the aftermath had set the stage for meaningful change. The branch would be stronger, the employees more aware, and the standards of professionalism more deeply embedded. The incident had been a wake-up call, a moment that would be remembered, and a turning point in shaping the future of the team. The CEO knew that there would be more challenges ahead, more decisions to make and more lessons to impart. But for now, she was satisfied that the first steps had been taken. Accountability had been established, reflection had begun, and a path toward improvement was clear. The staff had seen what true leadership looked like, and the bank's culture would evolve as a result. And so, the story of that morning, with its tension, confrontation, revelation, and reflection, continued to unfold. The CEO had witnessed the weaknesses, the strengths, and the potential for growth within her team. She had acted decisively but with fairness and empathy, setting an example that would guide the branch toward higher standards, greater respect, and a stronger sense of professionalism. The morning had been intense, the events unforgettable, and by now the entire branch had settled into a quiet but reflective mood. The staff member who had slapped the CEO sat at his desk, his head bowed and his hands nervously fidgeting. He had spent hours thinking about the consequences of his actions, the embarrassment and the trust he had broken. He knew that things could never go back to the way they were before, and the weight of that realization hung heavily on his shoulders. The CEO, still calm and composed, prepared for the next crucial step. She had spent the morning observing, listening, and reflecting, and she knew that it was time to take decisive action. Leadership was not just about observation and guidance. It was also about accountability. Actions had consequences, and in her bank, respect, professionalism, and integrity were non-negotiable. She called the branch manager into her office, speaking quietly but firmly. "We need to proceed with the disciplinary process," she said. "This employee's behavior is unacceptable, and it cannot be overlooked. We must ensure that the action is fair, transparent, and educational for the rest of the team." The branch manager nodded, understanding the seriousness of the situation. They prepared the documents, reviewed company policies, and arranged a formal meeting to address the incident officially. The staff member was called into the CEO's office for the final discussion. The room was quiet, the air heavy with anticipation. The CEO looked at him directly, her eyes calm but piercing, as if reading every thought behind his nervous expression. "You have had time to reflect on your actions," she began. "You know what you did was wrong, and you understand the impact of your behavior. Now it is time to take responsibility." The employee swallowed hard, nodding slowly. I understand," he said quietly, his voice barely audible. He knew that words alone could not erase what had happened, and he felt the full weight of his mistake pressing on him. He had been impulsive, disrespectful, and unprofessional, and now he realized how serious the consequences would be. The CEO continued, her voice steady and authoritative. "After careful consideration, and to uphold the standards of this bank, I have decided to terminate your employment. Your behavior violated our core values, and it is not acceptable under any circumstances. This is not personal. It is a matter of principle. Accountability is essential, and this action is necessary for the integrity of the team and the organization." Shock registered on the staff member's face. He had expected a reprimand, perhaps some form of guidance, but he had not anticipated losing his job. The reality hit him hard. He realized that the decision was fair, just, and necessary, even though it was painful. He had crossed a line that could not be forgiven in the context of professionalism and respect. The CEO gave him a moment to process the news, then spoke again, her tone softening slightly. "I hope you take this as an opportunity to learn and grow. Reflect on your actions. Understand their impact and use this experience to become a better professional in the future. This is not just about punishment. It is about ensuring that you understand the value of respect, empathy, and accountability." The staff member nodded again, tears forming in his eyes. He felt a deep sense of regret, realizing that he had not only hurt his boss but also undermined the trust of his colleagues and the confidence of customers. It was a painful lesson, but it was one he would never forget. He left the office quietly, humbled and thoughtful, aware that his actions had consequences that extended far beyond the moment. Meanwhile, the rest of the staff watched closely, understanding the gravity of the decision. They saw that accountability was not just a concept. It was real, immediate, and enforced. The CEO's decision sent a clear message. Professionalism, respect, and integrity were not negotiable. Her approach was firm but fair, demonstrating the standards expected in the workplace and reinforcing the culture she wanted to uphold. After the termination, the CEO addressed the remaining staff again. "I know this has been a difficult experience for all of you," she began, her voice calm and empathetic. "But it is also an opportunity to learn. We must reflect on how we treat each other, how we interact with customers, and how we uphold the values of this organization. Every day, every action, every word matters. This is a moment for growth, not just for one individual, but for the entire team." The employees listened attentively, understanding that this was not just a disciplinary action, but a lesson in professionalism, ethics, and leadership. They realized that their actions had consequences, and that even small moments of frustration or impatience could have lasting effects. The morning's events had left a mark on everyone, shaping the way they would approach their work in the future. The CEO then introduced a plan for improvement. "We will be implementing additional training on professionalism, customer service, and conflict resolution," she said. "These programs are designed to help everyone understand the expectations of this organization, to strengthen our skills, and to ensure that incidents like this do not happen again. This is an investment in you, in your growth, and in the success of the bank." The employees felt a renewed sense of purpose. They understood that the CEO's actions were not meant to intimidate, but to guide and support them in becoming better professionals. They began to reflect on their own behavior, thinking about times they may have been impatient, dismissive, or unaware of the impact of their words. The morning's incident had become a catalyst for self-awareness and personal growth. In the following days, the CEO observed the branch closely. She noticed subtle changes in behavior. Staff members were more patient with customers, more attentive to details, and more aware of how their actions affected others. The culture of the branch was slowly shifting, moving toward greater respect, professionalism, and empathy. The CEO felt a sense of satisfaction, knowing that the difficult decisions she had made were leading to meaningful change. She also made a point to recognize employees who had shown exemplary behavior during the incident and afterward. A young teller who had remained calm and helpful with customers was acknowledged for her professionalism. A security guard who had intervened appropriately was praised for maintaining composure. By highlighting these positive examples, the CEO reinforced the behaviors she wanted to see in the workplace, creating role models for others to follow. The staff member who had been terminated, though no longer part of the team, became a reminder of accountability. His actions had consequences, and everyone in the branch understood that. The CEO's decision had demonstrated that fairness, respect, and professionalism were essential, and that leadership required courage, decisiveness, and integrity. As the days went on, the branch began to operate more smoothly. Employees communicated more effectively, customers received better service, and the overall atmosphere became more positive. The CEO continued to monitor progress, providing guidance and support where needed, and ensuring that the lessons learned from the incident were deeply embedded in the team's culture. She also reflected personally on the experience. Going undercover had been a risk, but it had provided invaluable insight into the true dynamics of the branch. She had witnessed weaknesses, strengths, and the potential for growth. She had confronted wrongdoing directly, enforced accountability, and guided her team toward improvement. The morning had been challenging, but it had also been transformative.